Amie of Garmoran, also known as Amie MacRuari and Euphemia, was a 14th-century Scottish noblewoman who was the sister of Raghnall MacRuaidhri, Lord of Garmoran and the spouse of John of Islay.After her marriage had produced 3 sons, the ambitious John of Islay divorced her in order to remarry and cement his links with the House of Stewart. She then retired to her estates in the Highlands and Islands, and completed various ecclesiastical and other building projects. Her son Ranald was the progenitor of Clanranald descent. Amie was a direct descendant of Amie MacRuari through her great-grandfather Ruaidhri mac Raghnall, the founder of MacRuaidhri kindred. Ruaidhri's son Amie MacRuari possessed the North Isles of the Uists and Benbecula. He is known to have attended Parliament in 1285 when the succession of Margaret, Maid of Norway, was debated, and to have added Barra to his lands in 1309. His illegitimate son Ruaidhri mac Islay was Amie's father, when her distant cousin Alexander of Argyll's support of the opponents of King Robert the Bruce led to the forfeiture of his lands. They were distributed between John of Islay and Ruaidhri mac Islay. The latter received much of Lorne, parts of Lochaber, and, through his sister Christina, Garmoran and the North Isles, including the small Isles of Rum and Egg. Bruce was however careful to ensure his interests in the west were protected, and Dunstaffnage Castle was given not to Ruaidhri, now styled the High Chief of Lorne, but to a royal constable, Arthur Campbell. Towards the close of the Bruce's reign, c. 1325, Ruaidhri mac Islay was dispossessed for engaging in plots perceived to be against his king's interests. Amie and Ruaidhri also had a brother called Aileen, about whom little is known. Edward Balliol may have restored these lands to Ruaidhri's son and Amie's brother, Raghnall MacRuaidhri, a state of affairs confirmed by David II c. 1344, who formally granted him Garmoran and the North Isles, although Lorne was retained by the Crown and Lochaber in its entirety given to John of Islay, son of Eoin. Shortly thereafter, in October 1346, Raghnall was assassinated at Ilka Nunnery near Perth, as the result of a quarrel with Ulim III, Earl of Ross. Raghnall was the last chieftain of the MacRuaris, and Amie was his sole heir. Marriage, children and divorce. John of Islay was also a descendant of Somerled via his father, and thus a distant relative of Amie. By marrying this heiress to the MacRuaidhri lands, he eventually controlled significant stretches of the western seaboard of Scotland from Morven to Loch Hourn and the whole of the Hebrides save for Skye. The marriage took place in the 1330s, probably in 1337. From 1336 onwards, John began to style himself Dominus Insularum, Lord of the Isles, a title that implied a connection to the earlier kings of Man and the Isles, and by extension a degree of independence from the Scottish crown. However, his ambitions were by no means quenched. He continued to build his power base by allying himself with Robert the High Steward of Scotland and the designated heir of King David. The marriage had by now produced 3 sons, John, Godfrey, Ranald, but John and Robert made an arrangement by which John divorced Amie and married Robert's daughter, Margaret Stewart. John is said to have obtained a papal dispensation for the divorce, which took place in 1350, just 4 years after Amie's inheritance. The Lord of the Isles now received Knapdale and Kintyre as a dowry, but in return his sons by Amie were to be passed over in the succession in favour of any children by the marriage with Margaret. Later life. The unvarying tradition of the Gadiel Tatch recorded in the late 19th century was that Amie had given her husband no grounds for divorce and lived alone on her own estates until her death. The divorce annulled John of Islay's rights to her lands, although he managed to procure a royal charter to them in which her name is not even mentioned. Amie was evidently of a pious disposition and built an oratory called Temple Michael at the southeastern point of Grimsby, and rebuilt the Temple Chalumchiel on Benbecula and the Trinity Church of North Uis. McGibbon and Ross also attribute the building of the Tower of Borv Castle, located to the southwest of the island of Benbecula, to Amie and dated the work to between 1344 and 1363. She is also said to have extended Castle Teorum in Moidart. John of Islay kept to his agreement with Robert, now king in succession to David, and his children by Margaret inherited his title and the bulk of his lands. However, Amie's son Ranald, who successfully petitioned for the return of much of the MacRuaidhri lands, including Garmoran and the North Isles, became the progenitor of Clan MacDonald of Clanranald and Clan MacDonald of Glengarry. Ranald acted as tutor to his younger half-brother Domhnall and was described as old in the government of the Isles on his father's death at Ardtornish Castle in 1386. He may have died in the same year, but the date of his mother's death is unknown. The descendants of Godfrey, Amie, and John's eldest son, who was titled Lord of Uist, were known as Silgori. In 1427, Alexander MacRuari of Garmoran, who may have been Godfrey's son, is recorded as being the leader of 2,000 men. Not long afterwards he was imprisoned in Inverness and executed for sedition by King James I.